Welcome to 60 minutes of unscripted.net entertainment. As the doctors of .net, we prescribe healthy choices in .net. I'm your I'm your what? I'm your host Cam Soper with co-hosts Scott Addy. I'd like to welcome today's guests, Dobri Kolev and Stephen Malme. Hey Dobri, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Dobri Kolev. I'm by trade a principal architect for a IT security company, but in my free time, I'm a evangelist for observability and gamification of various different approaches that one can visualize an application by just looking at it differently than the conventional ways.
Very cool. Stephen, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody, for taking the time today. I'm Stephen Malme. I work with the AWS team focusing on healthcare across the AWS cloud, and also have been able to team up with Dobri to create what we think is some very unique and front-end capabilities in terms of being able to visualize applications.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to hearing about it. We were talking a little bit in the green room before the show, and your project sounds really cool. I'm looking forward to seeing it. Scott, I think this is like the first time we've had an AWS person on the show, isn't it? You're muted, Scott.
Muted Scott is the best one. I was just going to point out in the pre-show we learned that Stephen in his work at AWS is actually not the reason why Dobri has lost his hair. It's also, we'll hear more about that, I'm sure. But yeah, here we are.
So Scott, you have a checkup doc for us?
I do.
Cool.
Let's roll into that. All right, I am not muted. All right, so the doc that we have to share today comes to us from an engineer on the Azure SDK for .NET team, Pavel. He's writing about the open telemetry support that is available in experimental form within the Azure SDK for .NET. If you're not familiar with open telemetry, or what I'll refer to as OTel for short, really what OTel is it's defining some common abstractions for things like instrumentation, collection, and exporting of distributed tracing data. The nice thing here is when you replace your existing tracing solution, let's say you're using Azure Monitor or Zipkin or something like that, if you replace that solution with OpenTelemetry or OTel, it's really only the exporter that needs to change in your application. Your actual application code and the integrations with third-party libraries are unaffected. Now, what this post is doing in the meat of it is walking you through how would you actually make use of this in the Azure SDK client libraries for .NET. That's what this Get Started section is all about. And just to kind of set you on the right path here, there are actually 3 different ways in this first step that you can opt in to this kind of support. The first one, it really just involves setting this environment variable to true if you're the type of person that would prefer not to set the environment variable. Good news is we've got these 2 other options that are called out here. From there, it's really as simple as installing the OTel NuGet package. And then you would follow that up with installing the exporter-specific NuGet package. Application Insights Exporter, in this case, is what we would have you install. So you can follow these steps through. There are a few more steps here to follow. And what I'd like to point out, this is easy to miss, so I'll point this out at the bottom of the post. This experimental support is only available for the Azure SDK for .NET client libraries that were shipped after October 1st of last year. Those will be the libraries prefixed with Azure Dot. So if you see NuGet package prefixed with Azure Dot, what that means to us internally is those are what we call our Track 2 SDK packages that adhere to the latest Azure SDK team design guidelines. So this is the checkup doc. Cam, did you flash the vanity URL for folks who are interested in this?
Sure did.
All right. So do check this out. And with that, we will roll into the hallway track segment.
All right, so Dobri and Stephen, you have brought to us today an APM of sorts, but with a unique interface, right?
That's right.
Okay, I'm really excited to see this. So, you want me to tell us all about it? Whatever the background is, share whatever you got to share. The floor is yours.
Okay. So I've been a software engineer for a while, and my focus in the last 10 years has been in distributed systems and high performance. And back in the day, when things like conventional APM that's currently available weren't in existence, you had a hard time. You had to look at logs, and you had to really be imaginative on how you see what the thing is doing under the hood. And over time, as things progressed, the systems I was working on were complex by nature, and there were definitely vendors out there that would give you APM. They're still pretty big companies, but the solutions provided were mostly on the browser side, on the flat surface. You would see things. They were either historical accounts or not really as they were happening, and so it kind of always planted this bug in my head that I see it one way in my head, and maybe I'm the only one that does that. But what if I could just make it happen so that the part where you imagine really wasn't something that you had to do, but maybe you could just enter an environment where you see all of the different parts of the application work together as it was happening, and being able to drill down at high granularity versus I'm going down this path, I've clicked down, I've drilled down a bunch of stacks, and then I have to go back up, or
So-
this happened and it's no longer relevant.
So when you say enter an environment, what do you mean by that?
Well, I really mean that you actually open an application that you could be immersed in. You could either use your Oculus headset, or you could fire it up on your desktop, and you can walk around in a world where you see the pieces of your application just kind of happen as they happen. Whether you have a bunch of containers that you're looking at, or disparate machines that are physical or virtual. But essentially, if you think of an environment like my QA or my prod environment, there's certain servers and databases and caches that are constantly interacting with each other, right? And sometimes something may be wrong and look like it's coming from over here, but you may not notice some other independent variable that's making everything just go bad.
So do you know what I'm envisioning? What I'm envisioning is Tron.
Okay, I won't disappoint. Or I'll try not to.
And it speaks to the point of current applications, Cam. And so when you look at the current architectures of modern applications, you see microservices, multi-tenant, highly parallel processes across the board. Like, that's just the very nature of modern applications. To be able to manage, monitor, debug, and optimize those types of applications, you actually have to be able to immerse yourself into the application and be able to both visualize and experience that parallel environment throughout that application process.
Okay, this sounds exciting. You've got to show us what this looks like.
Okay, I already have it pulled up on my screen.
I feel like I should be seated for this.
And so before I really make this go crazy on the visuals, I just want to go over some of the thought process. So when I first started out making this, I was envisioning that more or less every process is created equal, where if you had a plane where you said, okay, well, all my database calls and all my interactions, they just kind of have to be visible somewhere on a plane. And if I were to, assume that this plane would somehow be able to accommodate all my load. And then how would I make this so that it's not overwhelming? And so in this particular example, I'm looking at a representation that is really just an empty grid of an application that isn't doing anything at the moment. And so from an ambient perspective, if I log into the world and I see nothing, then flags rise up right away. But if I were to do any troubleshooting, then I needed to have some background knowledge of how this application is built and so on. So this is where open telemetry comes in with the spans, and the fact that you can associate a various call path and just kind of associate what each individual piece of that call path was. And so let me switch to something that is actually live, and we will go from there. And so I'm just going to zoom out from the top so we can just kind of take a look. So if every single operation that you see in your grid is a combination of spans, and this is kind of going down the path of open telemetry terminology, but let's take, for example, this thing that just happened. Hold on. Sure. Yeah. And so that's just trying not to get too much content on it while it's lighting up is difficult.
Is this the MCP causing us problems? The master control program?
It's probably because it's a live demo and things work perfectly on those. Okay, so I am very okay. All right, so this should be enough content for now. And so as this happens, let me just pause. So in open telemetry land, if we look at spans that are correlated together, essentially, if you were to think of them as, well, it's an atomic operation that has a bunch of tags related to it. In this case, I'm looking at a SQL query that happened out of band. There's nothing else related to it. But it gives you enough information. But then at the second side, if I had more things that occurred, and I would think of them as stacks, then I could essentially just visualize this process by stacking those and essentially getting a perspective of the complexity of the operation and how many things happened as part of that whole representation of, let's say, a REST API call or some background operation that triggered from a message, etc. And so if we take a look at, I'm sorry, I don't really know.
No worries. No worries. It's completely okay. So, but what you're describing sounds to me like end-to-end transaction tracking, like, say, for example, other for example, APMs like Azure Application Insights might do, right? Like from the entry point of the API all the way to the backend database calls, you can see that, like, the chain of transactions, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So
Okay.
if we just take for example, a full-on API. Like if we took one of the, I think the latest examples the team added to our YouTube channel, or the Immersive Fusion YouTube channel, was essentially the representation of what a minimal API would look like. So they took the David Fowler example, and if it's basically every time you call the API, it could be going through various pipelines and various from just the ASP.NET Core pipeline all the way through to calling some database and cache, and then essentially visualize that entire process.
So Dobri, while you bring up a live environment, what Immersive APM allows you to do is visualize, track, manage each of the different layers of the application, from the front end client experience through to the application logic, through to the database calls and accesses, through to the messaging, the inter-application messaging that actually helps you drive the application. And so what you're able to do is both filter, view either that in comprehensive environment and or individual elements within your application as it processes.
Now, when Dobri was, so we're seeing all kinds of 3D representation stuff here. So I'm guessing this is built like in Unity.
That's absolutely right. So there's, and honestly, I am ashamed to admit this, but the reason why I wasn't seeing anything is because I had a filter that was filtering only transactions that were longer than a second, and removing the filter showed us, this particular content. So the three basically big pieces to this are the open telemetry part, which was a process in and of itself. Initially, I started with wrappers around the code that was being called, and that was way early on. Then I just experimented with castle proxies, dynamic proxies of, I don't really want to wrap. And then there was open metrics, and that was great. It was a huge leap forward. And finally, open telemetry, like you guys said in the beginning, you really have to really muck with the exporter at the end to really get it to go where you need it to go. And so essentially, all your data would go, in either a custom repository of data, or some product that you're building.
So Dobri, could you please take us from the top-down view, which you're seeing here? So you're seeing all processes in parallel, and then take us into the grid, please.
So each one of these like stacks that are dropping down, these are like end-to-end operations.
Yeah. So let's take a look at this one, and for the sake of the demo, this is using a de-identified set, but it'll hopefully get clear as we go along. So every one of those is a distinct operation. If you think of a stack, it is I clicked on a UI. That UI triggered a process that went through an API. It might have moved to a different machine because I've submitted a message over a message bus or something like that. Then the process completed over there, and somebody's password got reset, or an email went through. So this entire thing is the operation from end to end. And so every one of those stacks is other distinct operations as well that are happening at the moment. So some of them are smaller because they're simpler, or some of them, there could be stacks that are 30, 40 boxes because this process had something to do with, I'm talking to the database frequently, or I'm loading up something from disparate other systems, and so on. So looking at the grid, you could see the complexity of your application just by staring, just by glancing, right? So it leverages a lot of ambient perspective or ambient additional details by even the colors. The colors, all green is great, or if there's some red, then obviously there's some errors that are occurring, and so on. And so, but back to the original question, if you take the open telemetry content and you shoveled it through somewhere, this is where Unity comes in, because it's essentially taking the data that is currently being supplied by the exporter from our telemetry and generating boxes for every single one of those operations, augmenting them and placing them on a grid in a particular way. And I go into that way in a second.
You may have covered this part already, but which exporter are you using for this project?
So it is a custom exporter that I wrote because OpenTelemetry out of the box uses just the duration of a span. So it doesn't really care, when you started or when you ended. This in particular, if the application is taking a while, let me unpause. I don't know if I'll see any on this particular one. Or maybe just give me a second. Let me switch to a different one. Maybe I'll get.
While you're looking for that, so we're looking at this in a window, but you guys actually this is supported in VR, right? I mean, you can actually when you talk about entering your the world of your application, you're talking about fully immersing yourself in the telemetry of your application.
That's right. Exactly right.
So we support the Quest headset and provide actually that full three-dimensional experience. So you can literally walk through your application, inspect each of the individual operations and the interactivity between those application components.
We need more development tools that use VR.
I've been trying to find a good reason to expense a HoloLens headset. Maybe we found that reason.
Yeah, it's really fun to get down into the nitty-gritty of what else can I do with this system?
So you had mentioned the different box colors that could be possible, green and red. Are there any others, like a yellow, or possibly a warning was detected?
Yeah. So again, the premise of this is that you don't have to stare at it, but you can have it as an ambient. It's just sitting on one of your screens, and the greens, or if an application is taking a while for a particular block, and you can imagine if you have sub 100 millisecond response time, everything will just be green by the time it falls down to the grid. But other times, if it's taking a while, it's a different color, so it's kind of a bluish. So it gives you an indication that it's doing something. It knows that it's happening, but it hasn't reported the completeness. So that exporter keeps track of when it started, and then when it completes, then it marks another message that says, okay, now you can mark it green.
So this view is the one you were talking about, the ambient. We're just sitting here, we're watching operations go by, and everything is hunky-dory.
Yeah, and in this particular case, you can tell, well, this is really not a really busy system. It only is doing certain things at the moment. If I switch back to the other system, then it can get pretty busy when we even are just looking at the top down. So this is still not as heavy as it could be. With filters, you can make it more robust in
Dobri,
terms of the data set. Yeah.
If you could please take us on that path from the top-down view into the grid and then actually down into the filters, so that people have an appreciation for how to be able to navigate across the different application interactions and transactions.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'll get to that in a second. I just want to get through the question about the colors. The red definitely shows you errors. The fact that these blocks are green even before you see them on the screen means the application is performing really well. If you end up seeing a whole bunch of blue or orange even, which is kind of like the warning of, I don't know what happened to this thing, then you kind of have a way that just by glancing at the screen, seeing the health, and then saying, oh, I need to do some more investigation if I haven't already gotten an alert that something isn't right. And so if I looked at all of this at all times, it could get a little busy. So if I go back to the grid, at any time I can switch to a different view, which is called the filter view. And in the filter, I have various tags that I can I can look at and change my subset. So I can change the stage, so I can only look at failed or lost, or I could look at ones that have been received but haven't been processed. So effectively, failed is error, and received and published are more kind of like the intermediate operations. Like it was requested, but the SQL statement is taking 30 seconds to come back. Another one is if I wanted to look at my duration, I can say, give me the ones that are 500 milliseconds or a second, and then when I'm doing a demo, nothing shows up on a big system. But and then once I have my filter that I'm interested in, there's various filters here that I can apply. There's all kinds of API endpoints and routes that I can look at. Let's say, I'm getting my health check failing a lot, so I just want to see that, etc., or a database that I'm hitting, and so on. And then when I do change that, essentially it changes the well, apparently that permutation had no yield at the moment. So let me just do one that actually gives me. Let's just go with ones that are 200 milliseconds and see. So okay, still a lot. Maybe I'll go. And so now all I'm seeing on my grid is things that are taking 500 milliseconds on the span level or longer. And so immediately I can compound down to, okay, I'm interested in only the slow stuff, and I'm looking at my grid and I see nothing, but it is still green. So effectively I'm eliminating a whole bunch of the noise that I would normally get. And so at that point, anything that I have, and let's just clear the filters. If I do get an error, or even not an error, I'm just trying to troubleshoot a particular thing, and let's say, just for the sake of this example, I could say, well, this is having a problem here. I want to just export it, or I just want to look at it as it's happening. Then I can walk up to any one of those cubes and take its stack information. If it was an error, I would even get the stack, so I can just paste it into my IDE. But in this case, I just export and.
So Dobri, I wanted to just comment based upon some of the questions and commentary that are part of the meeting. When you look at this, when you look at the Immersive APM, this application actually integrates directly to any .NET Framework, .NET Core application, and allows you via open telemetry with about 10 lines of code added to your application and recompiled. It allows you to integrate this application as an integrated application performance monitoring environment. So you can carry this along with your application and provide this experience.
That's very cool. There was something in the chat I wanted to try and address. Our friend Phil Snable was pointing out that there's the accessibility aspect of this. Let's say for folks who are colorblind, are there plans to accommodate folks like that, or maybe you already have something in place? Think of red-green color blindness, for example, and maybe that posing an issue with overall usability.
Yeah. One of the things specifically is, or actually Steve used to joke about it, I'm not sure. It's all dark themed in a way. And so there's some effort that the team is putting in place where the skybox can already change to another color. But there really hasn't been. It's important that accessibility gets addressed, but so far, since I let go of the process and now it's kind of in Steve's hands, there's been different fish to fry first. So at some point, hopefully it will get addressed and easier to use. But currently, really the extent is we have a different skybox, and a web client similar to to what you would get from other vendors. So if you didn't have the capacity to fire up the client and you just wanted to go online and look at some stacks and do the conventional way, then that's an option too, and that's also light and dark themed. But yeah, it's a moving target with a lot to do, and which is also why I kind of had to hand it off as it's impossible to survive such an APM and grow it enough as a single person. I mean, this is why
so your APM is written so the UI is written in Unity. We had a question earlier that they were wondering what the rest of the stack is built in.
So in Unity we're using strictly .NET Standard for all interactions. There's mono behaviors for all kinds of things that happen. So it's exclusively in .NET Standard, which I dare say was probably one of the big selling points, because if you're constrained for time and you're already comfortable and you love C#, the engine that provides that out of the box in some capacity kind of wins out. And the other infrastructure where the authentication or the filtering that occurs and all of the preferences saving and other external API access that this client requires, that's all .NET Core 5 plus, ASP.NET Core 5 plus. So they're not minimal APIs, but they're strictly on the .NET Core side. And within that, we either go to a SQL database or a Mongo or other NoSQL database to accommodate the influx of data from large applications.
Then the next question that comes from that, our co-host David Pine asks if this is open source.
No,
it's not open. So this is your closed source product.
So I started this about 3 years ago, and kind of between my full-time job, I couldn't really work on it exclusively. And so Steve and I came up with a plan and then moved all the efforts into a company called Immersive Fusion. So there's certain things that are open. Like I think there's a plan for exposing the exporters and the added open telemetry code specifically for the tracking of operation when it starts and when it ends. But the actual client itself, or the business logic behind alerts and metrics, and we haven't really even gotten into that, which I'm hoping we would. All of the light up process, there's a lot in there that is still closed source.
Yeah, and we should take some time to go across the dashboards here, Dobri, and take a look at the more traditional look and feel of an APM, where you're able to dive into the different activities, the different metrics and measures of an application. So you can certainly still do this with Immersive APM. What you've seen so far is the more advanced views, the three-dimensional real-time views that are enabled through the environment that we have created.
Yeah. I wanted to also make sure that we have time for some code, because I think it's a good balance to go over that. But each of these charts are customizable, so they basically work off of the metrics that come out of OpenTelemetry, and they refresh. They're not themselves real time, but they refresh every some amount of time, which I don't know the current interval, but essentially all of the data that you see here, AppDex, database latency, and just various other metrics, for example, on database calls, log ingestion, all of these charts essentially work off of the same metrics, and users can customize the content of them. And in terms of how the performance is, all of this information just happens real time, gets aggregated. You can see she's standing on the map, and still I'm running a pretty high frame per second. all of that, it's important to note that it has no effect on the actual source application where that data comes from. One other aspect, there's the exporter, and then there's the .NET Core, the ingestion of that data from the data source. And we're also leveraging a really powerful transport called RabbitMQ. So a lot of the grunt work gets taken care of by the fact that we're just sending all of that information over to Rabbit, then it gets ingested and stored long term. So you can go back months if you really wanted to. So you could do the real time where you could say, I want to look at this particular segment of time. I want you to replay what happened at 1 a.m. And then just show me that. Like, don't show me the real stuff. Just show me where it blew up and how. And finally, the last thing, I guess, is the topology view. So if we take a look at, what the application is, normally you would see these kinds of charts. Normally you would see these kinds of charts when you're looking at a conventional APM. They're 3D. Not really. They're flat because they're usually doing it top down. When Immersive APM looks at those, it builds containers representation, or each individual machine that is in the ecosystem, whether it's a container again, or a virtual machine, or a physical machine. You see that representation of the machine plus the interactions that it has with other systems, other machines in the ecosystem. So again, I'm looking at a production environment. Well, these, as you can see on the screen, the ones on the right are actively doing something. The ones on the left that are not lit, they're kind of asleep, and they're all talking to this one database in the middle. And so as you get more dependencies, caches, databases, and the more things talk to each other, they kind of get closer, kind of like a force-directed graph, right? So if I have two servers that are heavily doing something together, they eventually just reorganize the topology view, and they just pull each other closer. So you could look at the topology and go, oh, this makes total sense. These two servers are, so on, but then this other one's on fire. So what's the deal there? And this is kind of a fly through. You can kind of take a look, or you could literally go to it. And I think the team is reworking how each piece of code representation is being shown. Right now, it's not really showing you how the code functionality inside of the application, the processor of the information, really relates to other pieces of code. Like, let's say you have a common path that you normally go to, you want that lit. I think that's coming in a later version. But nevertheless, you go to a container representation and you go, oh yeah, I can totally see what the happy path is, or what the alert path is, or what's potentially going to be a problem for me in the future.
Yeah, this is fascinating. I think probably what the audience is itching to see now is some code. Is there any? I know you'd mentioned it's closed source. Is there any code you'd be willing to share?
Yeah. No, we'll be happy to show some. And just for a little bit of context, I kind of poke around in the code. I'm not really into active development, but the team lets me go and break things and experiment, and just kind of do things that I feel interesting. So I still have all of it in the latest versions, and this is some good examples that I have. So this base exporter is from OpenTelemetry, and essentially there's really the only pieces that are kind of new, and even if you start it from the console exporter in OpenTelemetry, you would see similar implementation where you have an export method that just takes various information from the activity. And again, activity is part of OpenTelemetry, essentially takes tags and other information that is relevant, and then essentially at the end of the day formats a message that will be sent out to the rest of the infrastructure. And so if we take a look at the it's been a while since I've looked at this code, but it will be should trace export result. And essentially, whether it's a server activity, whether it's a producer consumer activity, or whether it's just something that happens on the client, it just kind of figures that stuff out. And essentially, when it says, okay, I need to trace it, I'm going to add it to this queue. And the queue then just gets drained by just taking whatever activities have been formatted into messages, and then sends them upstream. So again, if you started with a console exporter, you would be able to do that particular math with the, when it started, when it ended. If you wanted to pre-export and then export when the application is done, then really at the end of the day, Immersive APM just kind of collates that and makes it into a clean use.
I didn't mean to cut you off, Dobri. So this code that we're looking at, is this in the APM that we're looking at, or is this one of the applications being tracked? Because I know Stephen mentioned earlier that there was like 10 lines of code involved to track an application.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think it would be useful if I were to just...
This is actually in the APM cam. And so while Dobri brings up some of the samples here, one of the things that a question that was issued during the conversation, what is some of the source input here? And so the various customers that use Immersive APN range from manufacturing solutions to medical systems to document management systems. And so all of those different types of cloud modern applications directly integrate Immersive APM and then utilize the APM to provide this entire environment. Dobri, back to you.
Yeah, so much like what Scott was showing earlier, there's the baked-in OpenTelemetry packages that come from OpenTelemetry. There's some decorating ones for SQL client and extensions. So you just kind of take that from OpenTelemetry, and you benefit from the community. At the end of the day, you add this OpenTelemetry client direct, which basically is the one that is the high throughput one. And then really the code that you add is this. It's just here's my exporter, which uses an extension just like you would normally do in a .NET Core application. And then behind the scenes, it wires up this exporter. And at that point, the exporter is part of the pipeline. So this code wires up the NuGet capabilities into the application. And when the application starts, it just starts sending that configured telemetry as well. And there's also ability to collate logs as well. So there's another extension that says, okay, all the logs that I get from Microsoft Extension loggings, add this logger as well. And then when I look at my traces and logs, I see both of them together in the Immersive APM client.
So to complement what Dobri's highlighted in terms of the lines of code and the simplicity that you can actually experience to add this into an application, one of the things that we would invite you to do, and we would love your feedback on, is actually to integrate Immersive APM directly into any of your applications. And it'd be really interesting to receive your feedback and commentary, because we're certainly always looking to improve. You can actually download, integrate, and run a forever trial of Immersive APN. It's pared down a bit from a full production environment, but that forever trial certainly allows you to experience most of what we've shown you today. Dobri, can you zoom in a little bit, please?
That was my next question is how can customers get their hands on these bits, and if there's a startup cost involved, and you mentioned that there's a trial, and all of a sudden my curiosity is piqued. I'm gonna be stealing my son's Oculus after the show and trying this out.
Yeah, the Oculus experience is great. So I look forward to your comments on the Oculus Cam.
If there's time left, I'd be happy to put my Rift on and show you guys. But there's like literally in 5 minutes, there's a minimal API instrumentation explainer, core instrumentation explainer, and essentially it walks you exactly how you would do that. And then in terms of getting started, there's also every video at the end of it. There's a getting started, which essentially walks you. Well, I'm already logged in, but there's a start a trial, select your region that you want your information to be stored, and then and off you go, following those 6-10 minute tutorials. Let's go back to some code. So if there's any, are there any questions you guys wanted to talk about first, or should I go back to code?
I think let's go back to the code.
Okay.
Nothing in chat right now.
Okay. And so then we switch gears. Then we go into, what's under the hood. And so what it originally was the case. So RabbitMQ, as I mentioned, is a pretty pivotal piece here, and it's the transport of choice. It could be another option if we so chose, but this one has been my favorite for a while. And essentially, the fact that we're constantly connected to this transport allows us to do several cool things. And so if we were monitoring an application, again, we have the instrumentation, the NuGet package wires the exporter. The exporter then says, okay, I have all these messages, I need to send them off. Then it goes into this diagnostic client. And the diagnostic client does one of two things. It will either open a connection every time to the Rabbit and then close it. So it opens the channel and it closes it. It's not very efficient because if you're constantly sending a lot of data, essentially, you lose performance and you're hitting your Rabbit a lot by open, close, open, close. So it has certain benefits to it. Like again, if it's an application that doesn't have a lot of throughput, you don't want to keep your channels open for a long time. And the NuGet package allows for that toggling. The alternative to that one is that it is basically a constantly open recovering channel that essentially says, if you have something, I'll just ship it out. And if I lose connection, I'm going to get it. So because of that, we get real time right away. And essentially it never drops. So the moment I click that button on the UI, I'm going to see a cube fall from the sky for that operation that I just performed. And finally, I'm trying to have some time for at the end, and then also do the Rift part. So if I'm rushing, please interrupt me.
You're fine. Just to give you a heads up, we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, that works. And so this is actually the solution for the Unity application. And as I said, it's all .NET standard. And yeah, we've, the Unity client talks to various APIs in Immersive Fusion land. But this particular example essentially stands up a receiver for the Rabbit transport, and it starts absorbing that data. So it's not a standard mono behavior. I think the team added a strict one where actually it had, the particular methods that you normally have in a behavior actually baked in so that it's more standardized and easy to override. But essentially, at the end of the day, this is a mono behavior. And when the script starts or when it wakes up, it will authenticate with the API client, make sure a person's logged in, figure out what grid you're supposed to be on, and then start saying things like, okay, I'm connected, and absorb. And as it's getting that content, it establishes the connection to the transport. And then as it gets data, it fires events to anything that's listening. So in this particular case, we have a log receiver, we have a trace receiver, and essentially every time I get a payload, it will fire an event, a Unity event that says, I have a message, anybody that's interested, go get it. And at that point, things like the grid on the bottom will light up, and we'll start creating the boxes, associating them with the various with the various correlations, so that everything is stacked, and then start working on the topology.
So Dobri, while you switch into Rift mode here, one of the things that Dobri just highlighted was the fact that you are able to actually use traditional traces and logs and all of those views as part of this application experience. What we've spent the majority of time focusing on is really the more modern views in terms of measures and metrics, and then the current real-time views in 3D that we're now going to jump into, I believe, with the Rift headset.
Right. Yeah. So here I am, and I'm just going to go to the grid, and this is the kind of a busy one. So let me just walk away, put my headset on. It should switch me right away.
There we go. Dobri and I both had hair before we started this project, but due to hours of running with a Rift, you can see the effect.
The strap wore it down.
Exactly.
Yeah, hold on. It's making me do my play area. Just give me 1 second, please.
So what we're seeing here is what we'll see with Cam immediately after the show.
Except I won't have my camera on.
And you have hair. For now.
Hold on.
So our friend Fuel Snable asks if that's going to be the mark of the programmer in the future, and that's no hair due to Oculus usage.
Sorry, it's
and we would just say yes.
Time, but I should be okay. So as you see here, I'm looking around. Up there is my topology view.
There you go. Yep.
Yeah.
And then essentially, as I walk up to a cube, the team's currently working on, as far as I know, and Steve, you can validate what I'm saying, but every time I go to a cube, I can literally put my controller on it and freeze it and interact with it and kind of like zoom in onto particular tabs.
Yeah, so Dobri, if you could please just go to a cube and hold your position, please, because we're going all over the place here.
Yeah,
so,
probably people are getting sick. Okay.
Yeah, so we're going to get motion sickness. So just go up.
Pause it. Let me pause it real quick because it's starting to get a little crazy. And what's cool about it is that most Oculus applications, they're either yes or no, right? Or in this one, you can switch mid-flight. Like you could be, I'm looking at my thing and I went to where I needed to be.
And so just zoom on a cube, please, so that folks and stay there, please, so that folks can get an appreciation for the ability to both view, actually dive in and manipulate the cube, or inspect the cube, and then move on to another aspect of the application. That's a great view right there. Thank you.
Yeah. And so with the new stuff that the team is working on, the view that you saw with the tags, with the mouse over that's currently 2D, that will be 3D, so that you can say, okay, well, show me everything for this tag, or show me everything for this user, and then just kind of blow it up and just kind of use your whatever your heart's content is to dive however far you want. And this
Now, I just want to point out for our viewers that the down in the lower right, you can see they're rendering at generally between 20 and 40 frames per second. Now, the app that we use for streaming seems to be dropping a lot of frames, but this is a much smoother experience for Dobri.
And so Dobri, I would just stop with the headset, because just by moving around, it does look very jerky on the display. But to the point that you're making, Cam, what you're able to do is actually inspect your application, walk around all the different transactional stacks within the application, and understand the parallel processes, messages, and interactions of that application.
That's so rad. Where's Jeff Bridges?
Oh, you're gonna get me in trouble with someone, that's fair. But yeah,
or that needs to be a feature, is some kind of view where you ride light cycles.
I did something where it was for a colleague of mine, and Steve has been gracious to not remove it, but this client allows me to, or allows the company to really leverage space, right? Whether it's we do some I don't know, Steve, and maybe at some point you can talk about the Kickstarter stuff, but essentially allowing us to really leverage space, and making a differentiation between AR VR, because with AR I can fill up my physical room with servers and then run out of space, but with VR we can go all out. So this is an example of it's an arbitrary element that means something to me historically, and it's still in the client. And if we did Kickstarters, we could use other spaces. If we got if Jeff Bridges says, yeah, this is exactly what I really had in mind, we would definitely have
Exactly.
a space to put it in.
And to complement what Dobri is talking about, so we talked about this early on. One of the things that we are looking at is the use of Kickstarter to actually expose and then build out a number of the open source APIs into the product. And so we view that kind of community development as super healthy. And we also value that because we end up being able to get a lot of feedback and continually improve upon the product as a result of that. And so we look forward to that and appreciate all the feedback that you're able to provide on the solution.
Very cool. So we're winding down to the end of the hour. Did you guys have any final thoughts that you want to share? I know we shared your URL earlier for your product, and I know I'm gonna go download the demo and blow away a whole day's worth of productivity, because that's how the show works. But what is there anything else you'd like to share for our guests? Because this is insane. I love this. This is so cool.
Well, like Steve said, and I'm thrilled. I'm tickled that Cam, you're really into it. And I think one of the biggest challenges that I had even in the early days before I approached Steve was, well, everybody keeps asking me if this is a game, and I have to explain, no, it's not. It looks cool, but that's about it. And just what we're really interested in is how applicable people feel that this type of approach is to their way of thinking. Is it a hammer looking for a nail, or is it, yeah, you guys have a great thing going, and really it's the users of those applications, and the people that are on board and just kind of use it, that feedback. Oh, hey, here's a red one. I don't know if you saw it. It's right there. It's an error. That's really, really important and valuable to the company. And as an advisor to them, to Immersive Fusion right now, I take that really, really close and kind of advise further to make this into a really good solution overall.
So to complement what Dobri's highlighted, I would encourage you to download and utilize the Immersive APM. Would love your feedback and your use of the product. We think we've created a very unique environment. And Cam, to your point on wasting a day of productivity, we hope that it gains you 10 plus because of the capability to actually visualize, interact, specify the transactions and interactions that you wish to filter and view. And so we think it's a really unique way to get more developer productivity going forward. And so really appreciate just the opportunity to share this with all of you and love your feedback. Thank you.
Well, that is really really awesome. I certainly will play with it. I don't know, unfortunately, like in my day-to-day job, I don't monitor a lot of systems, but I will sure have fun playing with it if nothing else. So, and we hope that all of you have had fun with us on this week's .NET Doc Show. We will be back in a few weeks with guest Billy Mumby, who is going to be talking about open source through the cosmos. Don't be afraid, which I'm a little afraid. So with that, we'll see you next time here on the .NET Doc Show. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.